The Vethrani called it a gift. 12 containers of decommissioned material arrived at Dock 7 of the Meridian Station without ceremony, without an escort, and without even a proper manifest. Just a single transmission from Vethrani High Coordinator Savith that read in its entirety. For your continued service. Use as you see fit. Commander Elena Marsh stood at the dock threshold and stared at the containers for a long time. Behind her, her crew waited, 31 humans who had spent the last 4 years serving as what the Vethrani Alliance diplomatically called auxiliary technical personnel, and what everyone else in the galaxy called something much less flattering. Errand runners. Curiosities. Pets with wrenches. She turned to her chief engineer, a quiet man named Davis Okafor, who was used to solving problems by going completely still first, like water does before it decides which way to fall. Open them, she said. What they found inside was not equipment. It was not even salvage in any meaningful sense. It was material. Twisted spars of Vethrani resonance alloy, cracked beyond the tolerances their original designers had intended. Circuit lattices that had been shattered at the quantum bonding level. Propulsion cores that had been drained so completely they registered as inert stone on every scanner. Davis picked up a shard of the resonance alloy and turned it slowly in his hands. It caught the dock lighting and threw strange prismatic patterns across the floor, colors that had no names in any human language, colors that existed only in the space between frequencies that human eyes weren't designed to perceive. And yet somehow they perceive them anyway. They gave us their trash, said Lieutenant Yara Cole from somewhere behind Elena's left shoulder. Yara had a voice like cold water and a mind like a current, always moving, always finding the lowest path through any obstacle. Yes, Elena said. And they expect us to do what with it? Elena looked at the prismatic light still moving across the floor. It reminded her of something she had seen once, years ago, before the Vethrani had arrived in human space. A childhood memory of light through a broken window, how the cracks themselves had become the most captivating part. I have no idea, she said. That's what makes it interesting. To understand what happened next, you need to understand something about the Vethrani that their own diplomatic communications never adequately conveyed. The Vethrani did not experience the universe the way humans did. While we often acknowledge this obvious difference, we rarely fully appreciate its depth. Their sensory apparatus was built around coherence. Every Vethrani possessed what their biology called a velthus, a distributed nerve cluster that ran along the outer membrane of their body and functioned as a real-time coherence detector. It measured order. It measured the pattern. It measured the degree to which the immediate environment was resolved, the way a musical chord is resolved when every note finds its proper harmonic relationship. Disorder, to a Vethrani, was not merely unpleasant. It was physiologically distressing. A broken object did not just fail to function. It radiated what they called HFY, a kind of coherence noise that their nervous systems registered as something between pain and nausea. This is why they had given the humans the scrap. Not cruelty. Not even condescension exactly. The broken material was causing low-grade HFY throughout the station's Vethrani personnel, and removing it was a health measure. Giving it to the humans rather than simply jettisoning it into space was the Vethrani's version of generosity. They assumed the humans, who seemed curiously unbothered by incoherence, would simply dispose of it more comfortably. They did not expect the humans to keep it. They certainly did not expect what Davis Okafor began doing 3 days later in Workshop Bay 4. Davis had not slept in approximately 60 hours when Elena found him. The workshop was unrecognizable. Every surface had been covered, not with tools or schematics or the organized methodology of an engineer at work, but with arrangements. Pieces of the Vethrani scrap had been laid out in patterns across every horizontal surface, grouped and regrouped by criteria that Elena could not immediately identify. Some groupings were based on size. Some depend on the type of fracture. Some, she realized slowly, by the direction of the fracture, the angle at which the resonance alloy had failed, preserved exactly as it had been found. Davis was standing at the center of it all, completely still, in the way that meant he was about to figure something out. Davis, she said. The cracks aren't random, he said without turning around. Cracks in metal generally aren't. No, I mean they're not random in a specific way. Each piece failed along a stress line that was inherent to the original manufacturing process. The Vethrani build their resonance alloy by growing it, crystal lattice formation under controlled coherence fields. The growth process leaves invisible seams. When the material is stressed beyond tolerance, it breaks along those seams. He turned then and she saw the expression on his face, not excitement exactly, but something deeper and quieter than excitement. Recognition. The fractures are a map, he said. They show you exactly how the thing was built. Better than any schematic because the schematic shows you the intention. The fracture shows you the reality. Elena looked at the arrangements on the tables. She looked at the prismatic light still playing off the broken surfaces. What does the map tell you? She asked. Davis was quiet for a moment. It tells me that Vethrani resonance alloy, when it breaks in a specific sequence, when you guide it to break in a specific sequence, doesn't become inert. It becomes something else entirely. The coherence field doesn't dissipate. It inverts. He picked up 2 fractured pieces, each no larger than his palm, and held them close together without touching. Between them the air shivered. The prismatic colors intensified. An inverted coherence field, Elena said slowly, generates ash on a massive scale. Directed Ashvin. More than any Vethrani nervous system could tolerate. The workshop was hushed. Davis, Elena said. How massive a scale are we talking about? He set the pieces down carefully. Fleet scale, he said. If we build it right. Elena did not immediately start building a weapon. This is important. This is the part of the story that gets lost when people tell it later, that there was a gap between the discovery and the decision, and in that gap, Elena Marsh did something that none of her crew expected. She tried to talk. The Vethrani Alliance had been in open conflict with the Freth Collective for 11 years by that point. The humans had been conscripted into the Alliance's service 7 years ago, following what was diplomatically described as first contact facilitation, and what was actually a Vethrani fleet appearing in Earth's orbital space with weapons that made every human defense system look like a child's drawing of a weapon. Not an invasion. The Vethrani had been clear about that. They needed workers. They needed minds that could function in chaotic environments that their own people found unbearable. Mining operations in unstable asteroid fields. Repair work on stations damaged by Freth attacks. The Vethrani were quietly losing auxiliary roles in every uncomfortable corner of a war. The Freth Collective was not a villain in any clean sense. Elena had learned this slowly, through fragments of intercepted communication and the careful observations made over 4 years of watching a war from its ugly underside. The French had their grievances. The Vethrani Alliance had expanded into Freth space 2 generations ago, claiming systems the Freth considered sacred. Not religiously sacred but ecologically sacred. Systems that were part of a long biological migration cycle that the Fretha's own physiology depended on. The war was about survival on both sides. Which meant there was, theoretically, room for something other than escalation. Elena spent 2 weeks composing a communication to Savath. She laid out what Davis had found. She explained the potential of the weapon clearly and without embellishment. And then she proposed something that she suspected no one, not Vethrani, not Freth, not her own crew, would have expected. She suggested sharing the design with both sides at the same time to show that the focus would be on negotiation instead of one side winning. Savatha's response came in 4 hours. It was a single word in Vethrani. Velshra. Elena looked up the word. It took her a while to find a translation that satisfied her, because Vethrani concepts rarely mapped cleanly onto human language. The closest approximation was something like the kind of thinking that only beings without coherence could produce. It was not a compliment. It was also not a no. Lieutenant Yara Cole came to Elena's quarters at 0300 station time and knocked 3 times in the specific pattern that meant, "I'm not leaving until we talk." Elena opened the door. Yara came in, sat down without being invited and said, "You're going to build it anyway. I sent a proposal. They called you incoherent, which in Vethrani means roughly the same thing as calling you an animal." Yara's voice had that current quality, moving fast over the words. "We have been running their supply lines and fixing their damaged stations and breathing their recycled air for 7 years, Elena. We have been polite for 7 years. Politeness isn't the strategy. It's the baseline. The baseline isn't working." Yara leaned forward. "Do you know what I was doing before the Vethrani showed up? I was finishing a doctorate in systems theory. Specifically in cascade failure analysis. How complex systems collapse when a single critical node fails. I had a thesis. I had a future." "I know, Yara. Then you know that I'm not being emotional right now. I'm being analytical." She pulled up a small projection from her wrist device, a diagram that Elena recognized as the cascade model Davis had been developing for the weapons deployment pattern. "If we use this model correctly, we don't have to destroy anyone. We demonstrate the capability. One controlled demonstration against an unmanned Vethrani target, something significant enough that they can't dismiss it. And then we negotiate from a position where we are not cargo." Elena looked at the projection for a long time. And if they respond with force? Then we use it for real. Yara's voice didn't change. But they won't. Because the Vethrani are not cruel. They're just certain. And certainty breaks faster than cruelty when you show it something it cannot explain. Outside the small viewport in Elena's quarters, the stars were motionless and patient. "Give me 3 more days," Elena said. Yara stood. "You have 2. They called it the fracture array, which was Davis's name and therefore precise to the point of being almost poetic. The construction took 11 days. Every member of the crew worked, not because Elena ordered it but because the project had a quality that good work sometimes develops, a gravity of its own that pulls people toward it. Even crew members whose specialties were navigation or medical support found themselves in Workshop Bay 4, learning the strange grammar of guided fracture and developing the careful hands required to break the Vethrani scrap in exactly the right sequence. The process was unlike any engineering Elena had witnessed. Normal engineering was additive, you assembled components into a system. This was something else. They were subtracting, guiding material toward its own dissolution in a pattern precise enough to turn that dissolution into structure. Every crack was a decision. Every fracture was a joint. Davis moved through it all with that particular stillness of his, directing without commanding, showing without explaining when explanation was insufficient. He had developed a vocabulary for it, not technical language but something closer to the language of attention. "Watch how it wants to go," he would say. "Follow the seam. Don't force it, invite it." Yara, who had once studied cascade failures, understood it immediately and became his most precise student. She had a gift for seeing the moment before a system changed state, the instant of transition that most observers missed because they were watching the event itself rather than its approach. On the 8th day something unexpected happened. One of the youngest crew members, a 23-year-old navigation technician named Sam Reyes, who had been born after the Vethrani arrived and had therefore never known a world without them, sat down in the middle of the workshop floor and began to cry. Not dramatically. Quietly, with the kind of crying that comes from something shifting in a deep place. Elena sat beside him. "I don't know what we're building," he said. "I know what it does. I just don't know what it is." Elena thought about that for a moment. She looked at the array, 3/4 complete, a structure that had no analog in any human engineering tradition, that had been built entirely from the Vethrani's discarded failures, that generated something the Vethrani experienced as pain from material they had thrown away as worthless. "Neither do I," she said honestly. "I think that might be the point." Sam wiped his eyes. He thought about it. Then he went back to work. On the 12th day, High Coordinator Savath arrived at Dock 7 without announcement. This was unusual. The Vethrani did not travel without ceremony. Their social protocols were elaborate and specific, and arriving unannounced was the kind of breach that their own cultural framework had no category for. It simply did not happen. Savath came alone. No escort, no diplomatic staff. Just the High Coordinator, tall, membrane-sheathed, with a faintly luminous quality that senior Vethrani developed as their coherent sensitivity deepened with age, walking across the dock in a way that Elena had never seen a Vethrani walk before. Uncertain. "I received a secondary transmission," Savath said. "It was using the human language communication band directly, without a translation intermediary, another departure from protocol. From one of my station's coherence monitoring systems. It registered a new coherence signature from this dock. A signature that should not exist. That would be our project," Elena said. "I want to see it." Elena studied the High Coordinator for a moment. In 7 years she had become reasonably fluent in Vethrani body language. The membrane patterns, the luminosity shifts, and the subtle variations in how the Velthus clusters distributed along the outer body responded to stimulus. What she was reading from Savath right now was not the condescension she was accustomed to. It was not even the careful diplomatic neutrality of official interactions. It was something she had never seen in a Vethrani before. Curiosity. Real curiosity, the involuntary kind, the kind that arrives before the mind decides whether it wants to be curious. "Follow me," Elena said. Workshop Bay 4 had been cleared of everything except the array itself. It stood in the center of the room, roughly 2 meters tall, asymmetrical in a way that was not accidental, built from shattered Vethrani resonance alloy that had been guided through fracture into a new configuration that no Vethrani manufacturing process had ever produced or intended. It did not look like a weapon. It did not look like any category of object that the Vethrani taxonomy contained. Savath stopped in the doorway. The luminosity along its membrane sheath changed in a way Elena had never seen. Not the pain dimming of an ashen response. Something else. A flickering, almost rhythmic quality like a system searching for a pattern it doesn't have a template for. This material, Savath said slowly. This was the material we gave you. Yes. It was broken. Coherence dead. Our instruments confirmed it. Your instruments measure coherence, Davis said from the corner of the room, where he had been waiting quietly. They search for the pattern they expect. This has a different pattern. Your instruments don't have a category for it, so they read it as absence. Savath moved closer. Its Velthus clusters were doing something Elena had no reference for, an active, probing oscillation rather than the passive reception she was used to seeing. What does it feel like? Elena asked. The High Coordinator was silent for a long moment. It feels, Savath said finally, like listening to a language I do not speak and understanding that it is a language. Not noise. Not Ashvin. A language. Another pause. This is what you intended to use against our fleet. That was one option, Elena said. It's not the option I prefer. What option do you prefer? Elena had prepared for this moment. She had prepared for it carefully and rehearsed arguments and positions, as well as the precise calibration of firmness and openness that negotiation required. She had prepared for a dozen versions of this conversation. She set all of it aside. I want you to sit with it, she said. Not as an Alliance High Coordinator. Not as our employer. I want you to sit with what it feels like to encounter something built from what you threw away. Something that should be nothing according to everything you know. And I want you to tell me honestly what that experience suggests to you about what we are. The workshop was hushed. Savath sat down on the floor. For a Vethrani, this was an act with no diplomatic category. There was no protocol for it. It was simply a being sitting on the floor in the presence of something it did not understand, choosing to remain. They stayed there for a long time. 3 weeks after Savath's visit, Elena received an unexpected contact request. Not from the Vethrani Alliance. From a Freth collective relay station positioned at the edge of the disputed migration corridor, the heart of the territory the war was being fought over. The Freth representative who appeared on her screen was named, as near as human vocal anatomy could approximate it, Tesh. Its body was nothing like the Vethrani's membrane-sheathed form. The Freth were solid and sturdy, designed to live in the heavy gravity of the worlds in the migration corridor, with their senses grouped in different areas on a segmented body and a constant, gentle movement, like how a forest always has a bit of motion. We have been monitoring the coherence anomaly at your station, Tesh said. Its translator was rougher than the Vethrani's. Direct contact between humans and Freth was recent and experimental. Our scientists are in disagreement about its nature. What do your scientists think it might be? Half believe it is a weapon. The other half believe it is something that has no name yet. Tesh's multiple sensory organs focused on Elena with an attention that felt physical. We are hoping you can tell us which. It's both, Elena said. Or it could be both. The decision about which one it becomes isn't mine alone to make. Pause. The subtle living motion of Tesh's body continued without interruption. The Vethrani High Coordinator Savath has been removed from their position, Tesh said. Elena felt the information land in her chest like cold water. When? 4 days ago, the Alliance Council determined that Savath's visit to your station was a breach of protocol significant enough to constitute an action of incompetence. There is a new High Coordinator. His name is Vethrani and he is not curious about broken things. The workshop behind Elena was empty. The array stood in the silence. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Because, Tesh said carefully, we have been fighting the Vethrani for 11 years over territory we need to survive. And in 11 years, no one has sat on the floor. Vethrani's communication arrived 6 hours after Elena's conversation with Tesh. It was not a single word this time. It was a full formal transmission, diplomatic in structure, precise in language and clear in meaning, as threats disguised as policy always are. The fracture array was to be surrendered to Alliance custody immediately. All research and development notes were to be transmitted to the Alliance Science Division. The human crew of Meridian Station was to return to standard auxiliary duty assignments pending a review of whether their status within the Alliance framework remained viable. That last word. Viable. Elena read it 3 times. She called her crew together in the main hall. 31 people. She looked at all of them, Davis with his stillness, Yara with her current quick mind, and Sam Reyes, who had cried on the floor of the workshop and then gone back to work. People who had been 7 years without a home they could fully claim, 7 years of useful invisibility, and 7 years of being handed other people's broken things and expected to simply dispose of them quietly. We have options, Elena said. I want to lay them out honestly and I want everyone to understand what each one means. She laid them out. Compliance, surrender the array, return to auxiliary status and accept the review. Flight, take the station out of Vethrani space, which they had the navigation capability to do but no clear destination for. Demonstration, activate the array in a controlled way that establishes their position without initiating hostilities. She did not advocate for any of them. Davis spoke first. There's a fourth option. The room waited. Give it to Tesh, he said. Give the Freth the full design. It is not intended as a threat to the Vethrani. Not as an alliance with the Freth. Give it to them the same way Savath gave us the scrap, without a manifest, without conditions. And see what they build. The room was very quiet. The Freth don't have Vethrani resonance alloy, Yara said. No, Davis agreed. But they have 11 years of wreckage from fighting the Vethrani. Their migration corridor is full of it. Drifting. Another silence. Yara started to smile. It was not a comfortable smile. It was the smile of someone watching a cascade begin. Elena sent 2 transmissions simultaneously. The first was for Vethrani. It was brief. It recognized his message, confirmed that the array was still with humans, and told him that within a day, everyone involved in the conflict, even those he hadn't thought of, would have the complete design details, and that no one, not even Elena, would decide what to create from those details. The second was for Tesh. It contained the full documentation, every fracture map, every guided break sequence, every insight Davis had developed over 11 days of working in the language of broken things. It also contained something Tesh had not requested, a personal note from Elena that was not diplomatic and not strategic. The Vethrani threw the document away because it hurt them to look at it. We built something from it because we had nothing else and we were curious. I don't know what you'll build. I don't think it matters as much as the fact that you'll build it from what the war left behind. Maybe that changes what the war means. I genuinely don't know. But I'd rather not know together than know alone. The 24 hours that followed were the longest Elena had experienced since the night she was 17 years old and sat with her mother through a crisis that resolved just before dawn. That particular quality of time, where each minute is both endless and somehow insufficient. Vethrani sent 2 more transmissions. She did not respond to them. On the 19th hour, a Freth collective science ship entered the migration corridor and began a systematic survey of the conflict wreckage drifting there. Human long-range sensors tracked it moving slowly through fields of broken Vethrani resonance alloy, the accumulated debris of 11 years of battles, every shard of it carrying fracture maps of exactly how it had been built and exactly how it had been destroyed. In the 23rd hour, the Freth ship went silent. Not dark, silent. Its active broadcast ceased. But its energy signature changed in a way that every sensor in a 6-system radius registered simultaneously, a coherence pattern that had no classification, that every Vethrani instrument read as catastrophic Ashvin, and that every Freth instrument read as something that apparently had no name in their language either, because the only transmission that came from the ship was a single Freth term that the translator rendered, imprecisely, as recognition. Vethrani ceased all transmissions at hour 24. The Alliance Council requested a communication channel to the Freth Collective Relay Station at hour 24 and 17 minutes. The first direct Vethrani-Freth communication in 11 years lasted 4 hours and 40 minutes. Elena and her crew sat in the main hall and listened to it without understanding a word, because neither party was using translation protocols. They were communicating in the raw frequency bands of their biology, Vethrani coherence patterns and Freth motion languages interweaving in a transmission that the human sensors could record but not interpret. Sam Reyes fell asleep against Yara's shoulder somewhere in the 3rd hour. Davis sat still the entire time. The formal ceasefire between the Vethrani Alliance and the Freth Collective was signed, the human concept of signing being adopted for the occasion as a neutral gesture, 47 days later. The migration corridor was declared a shared ecological preserve. The Freth biological cycle would proceed unimpeded. The Vethrani would establish observational stations rather than settlements. The precise legal architecture of the agreement took 2 years to finalize. But the war stopped in 47 days. Savath was reinstated quietly without ceremony, which was either an acknowledgement of error or a face-saving measure, depending on which Vethrani diplomat you asked. Elena received a communication from Savath 6 months after the ceasefire. It contained no policy, no diplomacy, and no formal language. It said, "I have been thinking about what you asked me. What the experience suggested about who you are. I do not have an answer. But I think the Vethrani word for what you are does not exist yet. We will need a new one. HFY, I believe we were wrong to believe our vocabulary was complete. Elena read it in her quarters in the early hours of station morning, with the viewport showing the stars she had been watching for 4 years. Davis was in Workshop Bay 4. He was always in Workshop Bay 4 now, not building anything, not yet, just sitting with the array in the particular stillness of someone who has learned a language and is waiting to see what it wants to say next. Yara had accepted a position advising the joint Vethrani-Freth Scientific Committee on Cascade Theory. She sent Elena brief messages at irregular intervals, sharp, current, quick observations about the way the two species were learning to tolerate each other's incoherence and the other's excessive order. Never sentimental. Always precise. Always, underneath the precision, something warm. Sam Reyes had started keeping a journal. He showed it to Elena once, not to share it, just to show it existed. The first entry was from the 8th day of building the array, the day he had sat on the workshop floor and cried. He had written, "I don't know what we're building. I think that might be the point." Elena kept her station. She had been offered a position in the new Joint Human Vethrani Liaison Office, which would have been a promotion by any structural measure. She declined. She liked the dock. She liked the way materials arrived without manifests and the way her crew gathered around problems, the way people gather around fires, for the warmth of something that requires attention. The array still stood in Workshop Bay 4. No one had asked them to surrender it anymore, and no one had asked what they intended to do with it. The question seemed to have resolved itself into something better, not an answer but the space where an answer might eventually grow. Elena walked through the dock one evening when the station was quiet and the prismatic light from the array's fractured surfaces was reaching through the open bay doors and playing across the corridor walls. Colors with no names. She watched them for a while. Caro, she thought, a word she had picked up somewhere in 4 years of living between languages, a word that meant something like do this, make this, or let this become what it is. She had never been sure exactly what she meant when she thought it, but she thought it now, watching the nameless colors, and it felt correct in the way that true things feel correct. Not because they resolve anything but because they are honest about what remains open. She went back to work.